we're recording now. Hello everybody, welcome to today's Ag webinar. Today we have some specialists from CQU who are going to be talking about their Spicing Up the North project. So this project is funded by the CRC for North Australia, and I'm really excited. It's got trials in North Queensland and in the Northern Territory. So please welcome Surya and Tieneke.
Thank you.
Today we're going to try things a little bit differently. So in the past we've asked you to put your questions in the chat box and we would talk to them at the end. But for today's talk, if you would like to type in a question in the chat box, hover at the bottom of your screen and you will see a small blue speech bubble. Type your questions in there and Tieneke will track them and they will answer them during the talk itself to make it a little bit more organic and stimulating. All right, thank you very much. Over to you.
Well, thank you, Chelsea, and thank you for having us in this seminar series. It's fantastic to be able to meet with you all and to be sharing some of the information that we have from these trials that we're currently running. So the project that we're running at the moment is called Spicing Up Northern Australia, and Surya and myself are both working on that project. We're working on a project funded by the CRCNA, CQU, and Agriventus Technologies. And I was just going to give you a little bit of a background about what we're going to talk about today. Both Surya and I will present and we will cover these 4 points. So Surya will talk to you about why the spice trade is important. He's going to give you a bit of a background about market information and a little bit of history of spices across the world. We're going to then look at an overview of this CRCNA project that we're currently working on. We're about 12 months into it now. It's a 3-year project. I will deliver the results from the summer trials, which are on black sesame. And then Surya will come back and talk to you towards the end about the next steps for the project and how it is that you might end up getting involved if that's something that you're interested in. So this is Surya Bhattarai, I'm Tieneke Trotter, and please drop your questions in, as Chelsea has said. We'll address them as best as we can throughout the presentation. We'd love to stay in touch, and we'll put our details in at the end as well for you to make contact.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It is we are very greatly privileged to be able to present the spice work on behalf of the spice research team, which comprise of us from the Central Queensland University, our industry partner Agriventus, and our research partners along the Queensland and Northern Territory and Western Australia. So we are presenting the joint work we did together in the field. So I'm really presenting on behalf of the team the introductory background of the spices. These spices are very common term, but comprise a large number of crops and wide number of species. They come from very diverse origin. The spices were traditionally a niche crop in Middle East and many Asian countries. That is a historical background, and traditionally grown by very small farmers in a small scale. So therefore, the spice industries were there, but not in the form of the industry for a long time. It was a niche crop, small crop, backyard crop, but was still important. The spice trade starts long time ago when we look at the history, but the rapid movement of the spice around the globe took place after the era of the colonial era, and therefore the active trading of spice between different continents, in fact, started with early 1900s. But the situation is no longer that at that stage. Now the spice and condiments are getting popular around the consumer all around the world. Therefore, the global movement of the spice species is rapid, and therefore you can see the supermarket shelves now has got a wide range of collection of spices and condiment crops, no matter where you are in the world. Although a crop or group of crop that has taken industry shape not very long ago, but the global, the business data or the market data are quite impressive. Currently, or as of 2018, the industry value for the spices and condiments is about 16 billion US dollar and projected to be around 23 billion by 2026. Interestingly enough, the prediction that the growth on the trade and marketing of the spices is going to continue at the 5% annual growth rate in that space. So has got a significant global market size at the moment, and there is a very clear the future that the industry is going to go ahead. So therefore, it brings the opportunities to tap into that that ever increasing the global market. So when we look at the market around the spices, the Asia is basically one of the largest market. Next. Largest market, followed by USA, Africa, Europe, and Australia is a reasonably small market in terms of the total global trade of the spices and condiment crops. So spice is a common term, as I presented earlier, as it comprises a large number of commodity inside it. But in general, spice can be a seed or fruit or root or bark or other plant substances that are primarily used for flavoring, coloring, or preserving the foods. Therefore, instead of the commodity, it is the use that dictates whether any commodities or its parts of that plant is spices or not. But recent trend, so the traditional usage is for flavoring or improving the taste. But a very recent trend is more towards also the beverages market. So as you walk now into many supermarket stores, you can see a lot of different the beverages products in terms of the tea, the cumin teas or the ginger teas and so on. So that is one of the market taking a very rapid shape in there. Sometimes there is a mixture between intermingling between spices and the herbs, and depending on again how it's used in the food and food additives is determining whether a crop is spices or the herbs. The herbs are primarily used for flavoring or garnishing one. Many in the traditional the spices crop have now been recognized that they do have a strong antimicrobial properties. Therefore, a very big shift towards identifying the pharmaceutical and medical uses for a lot of spices crop. Therefore, there is in the marketplace, you can see based on the perceived health benefits, there is a lot of trading companies coming in and trying to link a lot of spices commodities with their health benefits. So as I mentioned into the earlier slide, Australia is a small market compared to the global market, but it is not very small one. Our the Australian market in 2009 for spices and condiment was valued 526 million, and it is projected that by 2025, our domestic market will value about 633 million, which means that our growth in the spice market are much faster than the global growth. In Australia holds about 20% of the annual growth in the spice and condiment markets. And this brings us the opportunities to get into spice and condiments, not only for Australian, the domestic market, but how we can tap into the very rapidly growing global market. As I said earlier, the spice is not a crop, it's a collective term for a number of crops. So, and the definition is also very variable, but the world standards, the spice standards mention that there are at least 63 different crops under spices, and the slides that just shows you some of that the diversities that there among the different species of the crop under the banner of the spices. So from here on, I would like to now pass on to Tieneke, and Tieneke will present what we have done in terms of the the field trials, because we have the part of the project, as Tieneke mentioned, that we're looking at the tropical adaptation of this spices crop. So we did some proof of concept before the project started, and the project is really looking at ground truthing, whether these crops can be successfully grown into the field, and then in the future, it will be testing for the commercial realities. But before we go there, Tieneke, I would like to share with you what we have seen in terms of the results for the trials that just we completed and what is coming in into the future.
Thank you. So you can see on this screen here the 5 spices that we're looking at trialling throughout the duration of this project. The first being black sesame. We also have fennel, kalonji, cumin and caraway. Each of these spices we're going to be looking at primarily from the seed perspective as the product. However, as we will discuss as we go along, there are a number of other byproducts and opportunities within the value chain that include the seed, but also include other parts of the plant. So the current project that we're working on is trialling those 5 different spices, the summer crop being black sesame and the winter crops being fennel, caraway, cumin and kalonji. And we're looking at their suitability across Northern Australia. To do that, we have got field sites across Queensland and the Northern Territory. We have 4 field sites in Queensland, as low as Biloela. We have one just outside of Rockhampton. We have got a site in Ayr and in Tully, and then we have 2 sites in the Northern Territory, one up in just outside of Darwin at the Coastal Plains Research Centre, and then we have one at the Katherine Research Station as well. At each of the 4 northern locations at Darwin, Katherine, Tully and at Ayr, we're working with partners from other organisations who are helping to manage the first stage of the trial, and we at CQ Uni are helping our producer partners just outside of Rockhampton and in Biloela to manage the trials at our more local site, Surya and I being both located in Rockhampton. Here's a little bit of a description of the sites that we have our trials at. When we planted black sesame, our planting date started as early November in Biloela. Through to late November, we were finished our planting in Queensland. We then planted a little bit later up in the Northern Territory, and the reason for that was that the planting in the first sort of second week of January was because we were waiting for the wet season to hit up there, and we were hoping to have a little bit more moisture available to allow this to be more of a rain-fed crop. So as a result, we had a variation in harvest dates from about mid-February through to mid-April. A little bit more site information is that this is the rainfall that we have seen occurring in the crop. So we had as little as 136 millimetres fall in Biloela throughout the full growing season. And the greatest amount of rainfall that was received, 996 millimetres in Tully. We also trialled black sesame across a number of different soil types, from alluvial loams, vertisols, sandy loams and ferrosols. And we've just put in a little bit of an indication here as to the cropping system and where we kind of could see black sesame perhaps fitting into some of the existing rotations in those areas. Here we've got the weather that we experienced throughout the growing season. It was a reasonably typical season, I suppose, with top temperatures across most of the sites ranging between 30 and 40 degrees Celsius on average, and then low averages of 20 to 30 degrees Celsius. So definitely a summer crop. The only thing worth noting really is that throughout the growing season, we typically start planting in the wet. For Catherine and for Darwin, we were planting sort of as that wet hit, and usually then we would be harvesting as it turned more into the dry season. The only difference there was that we found in Tully, and this is, you'll see some of this in the results coming up, that the wet season just hadn't stopped. Through Tully, they had quite a prolonged wet season. And one other thing worth noting was in Ayr, we experienced one quite significant rainfall event of over 300 mils within about a day to 2 days. So the only thing to know there is that although it was a significant amount of rainfall, there was no negative impact on the crop. So there was no crop damage. It happened earlier on in the crop growth, and it didn't cause any damage to those plants. Here's just a little picture of what the duration of those crops looked like. So from a planting date in early November, it started with Biloela and harvesting in early February. And then it just sort of staggered out a little bit as we got to each of the trial sites, and as again we were chasing that wet up north. What you can see here, though, is that the duration from planting to emergence was typically no longer than 5 days. So from putting the seed into the soil to having emergence was only 5 days. The duration from emergence through to flowering was typically just over a month, in Catherine just under, and then a month and a half to 2 months worth of time before flowering turned to maturity. On some of the sites, maturity was noticed, and there was a little bit of a delay between maturity and harvesting. In Biloela, we harvested right on maturity. And we'll talk about that in some of the slides and the implications for that, particularly around shattering and then potential yield loss. But what you can see here is a crop that would typically take between 11 weeks in the north, in the Northern Territory, up to 16 weeks into Queensland to go from sowing through to maturity to harvest. Here's some data that is showing the crop height and the height to the first capsule. So typically across all of the sites, the plant would range between about 1.5 meters and 2 meters in height. So sort of from a person height up to either a very tall person height or a door height. It was it's an annual crop, obviously, for 3 to 4 months that can grow quite quickly and to a reasonable height. Those first pods are usually occurring between 70 to 110 centimetres. There was one outlier in Rockhampton where the first pod wasn't measured until about 170 centimetres, but that was just one case and in variety 16, and that was certainly not the case for variety 16 at any of the other sites. It was lower. It was just an outlier in the data in this case. So we were going to talk about some of the results that we had found. The seed was hand harvested, so this is all based on hand harvested seed yield from small plots, and then that was extrapolated out to tonnes per hectare. We had the highest yield was experienced in Agriventus variety 6 at Billawheeler, and the lowest yield was experienced in Tully at about 1.1 tonnes per hectare. The average yield across each of the sites ranged from a high of just over 3 tonnes per hectare to a low of about 1.4 tonnes per hectare. The biomass was also recorded at harvest, and it was typically lower at that point than you would have seen at any other point throughout the season, because plants were starting to defoliate. They were losing their leaves, and that was the case at each of the sites, except for in Tully, where we have found some reasonably high levels of biomass, and that was due to that wet season not dropping off. With the constant supply of moisture, the plants didn't defoliate even though the seeds had come to maturity. We had the lowest biomass of just over 3 tonnes per hectare in Rockhampton, and the average biomass ranged from about 8.5 tonnes per hectare down to about just over 5 tonnes per hectare. Now, it's worth noting as well at this point that biomass is not necessarily a waste product in black sesame. Surya will talk a little bit more about that coming up. But just up here in the top corner is a picture of compressed biomass into briquettes, and Surya will tell you about those uses. Here we have a harvest index. The harvest index is the seed yield divided by the biomass, and is a potential indicator of plant efficiency and yield of the yield produced. So this is a range, an index, a range between 0 and 1, with 1 being the varieties that produce more seed per biomass. And so we experienced a harvest index of nearly 0.6 in Rockhampton from Agriventus variety 6, which was quite efficient at producing seed per biomass at that final point. Also remembering that conflict of defoliation at harvest, though. Because of the amount of biomass that was experienced at Tully, the lowest index was experienced then at Tully of just over 0.1. And the range there was between about 0.5 to 0.15. We also recorded the plant density at each of the sites. Now, when we sowed these sites, we had more seed in than we needed per metre square. We're looking at optimal densities for growing this crop, and so that we can help to fine-tune the agronomics. And so what we did was we went back through and did thin out some of thin out at each of the sites, but at slightly different rates. At Darwin, we had the highest plant density of about 48 plants per metre square, and at Katherine, the lowest was 17 plants per metre square. So that, on average at each of the sites, the highest was about 45 plants per metre square down to nearly 22 plants per metre square. At the other sites, it sort of ranged there between 25 to 35 plants per metre square. And again, looking at that optimal planting density. We then calculated the capsules, the number of capsules per plant. So we recorded how many capsules, and the capsules sit on the stem in pairs. So in white sesame varieties, you'll often have whorls of capsules around the stem. In black sesame, these capsules arrange opposite each other on the stem in pairs. with internode spaces between each of the capsules. And so what we found here was that at Biloela we had the greatest number of capsules per plant, creeping up to nearly 70 capsules per plant. And at Air, in Agriventus variety 11, we had just under 25 capsules per plant. So our ranges there were just over 65 capsules per plant to just under 30 capsules per plant. Now, the capsules being the structure on the plant that holds the seeds. We then went and looked into some of the quality parameters around the seed. In this case, we looked at the weight of 1,000 seeds. So this being one of the indicators of seed quality, we dried down each of the samples to 6% moisture. So the higher grams at 4.13 grams found at Biloela per 1,000 seeds indicates larger and more filled seeds, as opposed to 3.6 grams for 1,000 seeds at Air. And again, we have an average, and the range was just over 4 grams for 1,000 seeds to about 3.7 grams for those 1,000 seeds. We then looked into the seed density, and to do that, we extrapolated out some of the data around seed size and weight. And so the information that we have here suggests that a high of 678 kilograms found in Rockhampton to fill a metre cubed of seeds, to a low of 636 kilograms for a metre cubed. So every metre cubed of black sesame seeds weighs typically on average between that 672 to 638 kilograms for each metre cubed. Here we've got just a visual of those seeds by site and variety, and you can't really tell. There's not a huge amount of visual difference, the basic information that you can pick up from this slide is that the seeds were about 2 to 3 millimetres wide and typically 4 to 6 millimetres in length. We then moved on to look at oil quality. Now, oil was expelled using this benchtop machine, and once it was expelled, we filtered it and put it through a centrifuge to just remove the last little bit of cake that came across through the oil. But we then analysed the oil, and we found that at Tully there was the highest oil content of 47.8% oil in the seeds, and a low of just over 41% in Biloela. So that range was approximately 47% to nearly 43% in oil. And what we would expect is that to use commercial equipment, we might get a little bit more efficiency out of that extraction process, and those oil percents would probably increase. But the results that we're finding here puts the trial product within some of the highest requirements of industry, the industry standards that they are looking for, and they are typically set by the Japanese. We then looked at the relative density of the oil. And so if water has a relative density of 1, oil having a lower relative density, it obviously then floats on top of the water. And there wasn't a huge range between the higher 0.96 and the lowest sample at 0.87. And so, again, a high in Catherine of 0.9 to a low of about 0.88 was the range there, and not a significant difference between any of the varieties or the sites at this point. Cake is also a byproduct of oil. So when we use the oil expeller to crush the seeds and to pull the oil out, we also have cake as a byproduct. It is a byproduct, it's not necessarily a waste. This cake that comes out has about 21 to 25% protein. And so again, from this cake, there is the potential for value adding. Billa had the highest percent of cake content from oil expelling of just over 50%. Rockhampton had the lowest at 37%. And that range is typically between about 0.8 to 41% for cake. So at this point, I was going to pass over to Surya, and he's going to talk to you about what we found across each of those sites. But that probably sums up most of what we have found from the samples that we have taken in this first trial, small plot trial over this last summer.
So sorry for putting not a very beautiful slide here, just a few confusing lines. Wish we had some picture there, but there is some interesting information. So first thing is, when we look at the global average for the sesame yield, it's not a high yielding crop. The FAO 2019 data, just last year's of the data for global average is 550 kilogram per hectare. So when we look at the production yield data from throughout the world, yeah, it is 550 kilogram per hectare. It's a small producer. So the highest yield in the world are there in China, which is 1.39 ton per hectare, followed by 1 ton in Nigeria, and in the largest producers, which is Tanzania, has got 701 kilogram. So why I'm bringing this information is to look at where our yields lies at. So globally, it's just a half a ton. So there is some interesting data that we have here. We do have the yield as high as 3.3 ton against that global average. So that is some good news. We do have genetics there that has got the potential to produce up to 3.3 ton, but it's not producing in all sites, and that is where we come in. So the first year of the trial data is giving us two things. One, yes, there is a significant difference between the sites for the potential yield, and also there are some difference between varieties, and there is some interactions. But in nutshell, it is very too early to conclude because it's just a one season data. And then the crop is planted in different soil types in different areas, and they did have different amount of rainfall. So only thing we had constant is these 4 varieties, and we planted them in similar external fertilizer dose. So there were more variables than the control, but that gives us some indication. So the indication out of here is, so we have a strong message. We do have one variety, which is Agriventis number 6. That is consistently producing the higher yield. If you look at that yellow line, it is in almost every side sitting on the top. Or wherever it is not sitting on the top, it is sitting with the blue line. So this blue line is Agriventis 11, and the yellow line is Agriventis 6. They are almost in every side on the top of the other lines. So these two lines are consistently performing better. In Catherine, we have seen that Agriventis 11 is lower than anything else, but that's not statistically significant. So if I have to take the take-home message from this one, maybe it's too early to make a very valid conclusion, but what we would grow next year, perhaps I would say, to be safe side, maybe we grow variety number 6 or 11. That is what this graph will suggest us. And although the yield were not very high compared to a lot of other grain crops, even if that 1.5 to 1.6 ton that we saw in our lowest producing site is already higher than the highest yield, average yield of the highest yielding countries in China. So I think there is very good um, experience that we have collected here. The yields are very much encouraging compared to what the world average is. Very first year, we have been in such a very wide geographical location to test this one. So we have got a lot of learnings, and then we have faced a lot of challenges. What we see that they need to be sorted out to move forward. So the first challenge would be how we manage weed control going forward. That's one of the major constraints that we need to be resolved. We need to resolve that one. There are very limited chemistry registered at the moment for the herbicides used in sesame, but there are some provisional licenses or approval to use diuron, ultracolor as a pre-emergence, and bromoxynil as a post-emergence. So these couple of them, they are registered for the trial use, but there is also parallel work going outside the CRCNA project to look at the herbicides options for the weed control in sesame. So in the near future, definitely we'll have these herbicide solutions for the weed control. But at the moment, we need to remember that there are limited chemistry registered, but there are parallel work going on. So hopefully we'll have some more good news on the use of the herbicides for the control of the weeds. The other challenges that we have put as a challenges as a harvesting. The first challenge is the synchronous maturities. Not every plants mature on the same day, which is not new issues to any growers growing crops. But yeah, there is a bit of unsynchronized maturities. Therefore, the decision to make the time for harvest sometimes can be tricky. So we took an approach that when we said 90% of the capsules on those plants were physiologically matured, and then we took that indicator of physiological maturities as the seeds turning black from its milky dough stage to a turning stage. So we counted if there is 100 capsule in a plant, we go on the top 90 capsule, open it to see that that is on physiological maturity, which is now the seed is turning black. So that is one, that unsynchronized maturity is a challenge to make a decision on harvesting. The second is the moisture content at harvest is another important consideration, because unlike in other grain crops where we harvest the grain anything between 10 to 14% moisture, the sesame seed need to be dried down to 6% to get the product to the market. So that's a big challenge. That means that the crop need to be left into the field for a long time, and that expose the capsules to split. So that is one complication of that, the moisture requirements that need to be there at harvest. So therefore, the crop needed drying down very significantly. All the trial this year, as Tieneke mentioned, was a small plot, so we have managed the harvest manually. As you can see on one of the trial sites, we did have our crew there, cutting the plants, putting into the bag, tagging them, bringing back to Rockhampton, and pulling the capsules and separating the seeds. Looks very tedious, but in the background you can see that in our some pre-commercial trials, our partner growers, they have started using the harvester. But there is a lot between the effective use of harvester and harvesting. So there is a few things that need to be sorted out in terms of optimizing machine harvest. Here we really set up the header speed, header type, and the time, synchronization of the time. So there is some active work going on, but still the machine harvest is not fully optimized. The optimization of the machine harvest need to be sorted out. As this photo shows, yes, these are the capsules at physiological maturities. And you can see some of these early mature capsule has started splitting up. So the seed still holds there, but anytime there is the movement or when we have that stems upside down, the seed will fall out of the shattering type of varieties. So there are two different types. One what we call the shattering type. They will release their seeds when you put the plants upside down for those fully dried capsules. In other one, they will still hold the seeds in the capsule even if you put upside down. So the varieties tested here, they are not completely resistant. They are what we call the susceptible to shattering, and therefore the management decision about how to minimize that shattering before we harvest need to be made. We have seen a couple of practices that help minimize the shattering. One is harvesting the crop at physiological maturities and then drying down the seeds afterwards. So instead of leaving the seeds in the plant to completely dry down, we may be able to look at the opportunities to harvest before the capsules fully settles. The second option, where we have done some observation studies, is about use of desiccants. So after physiological maturities, we use the plant desiccants the way it is used for example, mung bean, and therefore we can desiccate the leaf quickly, and then that will also desiccate the stem. But as that process takes so short time, there is not enough window for the capsule now to fully open and release the seeds. And therefore, you can take the machine harvester and harvest there. So again, the moisture is not there at 6%. So the seeds drying need to be part of the post-harvest management there. So there were so the other line of the challenges are about the insect pest and diseases. But I guess it is still too early because this is a first year of the crop in most of the sites. So we did not have even a two cropping cycle there to see how the pest that we saw this year would continue and progress into the following crop. So it is too early to make a very extensive list of what are the insects, disease, and pest problem. But in this presentation, we're just presenting what we saw in the field in last season trial across different sites. So we saw a number of bugs, including mealybug and veggie bug, seed bug, some thrips, the beetle, among the insects, and there were a couple of diseases mostly associated with the root rot, the sclerotinia, and some leaf spores, the alternaria spores. Those were in the leaf and on the capsule, green capsules. There could be more. We have not noticed anything significant at the moment in terms of nematode, any physiological disorder, but it doesn't mean that they will not appear in the next year. So we will continuously keep our records for any new disease, insect pest, physiological disorders, or if there is any nematode infestation. So moving forward, I think we need to take the observations from our previous trial to put into them into a optimized agronomy in terms of the sowing time, which we have not sorted out for each of these sites because it's a very first year preliminary ground truthing. We have what we done last year is sort of a ground truthing. Can we grow this crop? But further on, to move forward, what we believe is we need to look at what's the effect of different sowing time at different locations, because they all has a different the climate pattern there. What sort of density we should be putting in, what sort of fertilizer requirement would be there for the particular soil type for each of the sites, and the fertilizer management. For example, in the Thali, we did have large rainfall there in a sandy soil. So we might have lost a lot of fertilizer that we put in the leaching. We have not tested the adaptabilities of the crop in different cropping system. We just went in there and put the crops in existing cropping system that was available to us. So we would not know how this crop would fit better into better cropping system, or what the effect of this crop in the following crop would look like. So that's some sort of a long-term observation that need to be made to go forward. And similarly with the disease and pest. But the yield, and then in the rain-fed crop, we would not never know how the next year would look like. So we do not have a long-term the yield, how it look like under a fully rain-fed system. So that is that's also need to be considered for the future. Moving forward, it's a new crop to Australia, and therefore there is still not a full export protocol, not required at the moment, but Agriventis is working onto that one, and hopefully we'll have some export protocol, and then the more global data on market demand and the opportunities on the markets. Definitely, we have seen there is a great opportunity not only on the production of seed, the value addition of the product, particularly through organic, low chemical crop, organic crop, the oil, the protein, the antioxidant harvest from sesame wastes, and the biomass processing. So we definitely see there is an opportunities for value adding across the post-harvest operations after the seed is produced. So to put things together, in conclusion, what we could say that is the hand-harvested seed yield is not too disappointing. It ranged from 1.3 to 3.3, 3 times difference. But I guess our future research will resolve how we can bridge that gap and get better in there. From the first year of trial, definitely it shows that the Agriventis lines 6 and 11 are performing better in most of the sites. So going forwards, choice of varieties, maybe one of those two or two of those 4 tested could be a logical way for progressing for the next season. The oil content, as Tieneke presented, is impressive. We do have 41 to 48% oil recovery in a small benchtop mill, which is encouraging, and that was the filtered oil. And then we did have a fraction of the oil sludge, which we definitely believe can be used for extracting the antioxidant and other products. So while we put the trial in, we also had extra rows and some plots for seed bulking to supply to the growers for verification trial in 2020-2021 season, because the last season we said it is ground truthing, and the next season what we would like to say is verifying those results. What we see in a small plots are these results will translate when the growers plant them into their field. So the curiosity for us and for our all enthusiastic growers for the next season would be how that results from this small plot will translate to farmers' managed condition in their field. Maybe there might be the both direction, because farmers are more experienced, so we might get better, or we might not get the yield that we got into the trial plot. So that is the curiosity. That's the question we really wanted to address for our forthcoming season planting. In Australia, the sesame has been accepted as an emerging industry, so there are parallel work going on in different places. So this is the one work that we do with the CRCNA, and there is a parallel work in optimizing agronomy through the separate support from AgriFutures, where Agriventis is partner as well. So there will be some more information coming through the outcome of that project in terms of the timing of planting, density of planting, and then some weed control. So there is that the information resources that will come in through there. So we need to watch on that space and see what we can get the information from other parallel projects on sesame in Australia can be utilized for improving or managing the black sesame crop for the forthcoming season and for the future. And last but not the least, it is not the product. I think it is the value addition opportunities of the product on black sesame could be very real opportunities for us to Australian growers and industries. And therefore, we said that there is a value adding opportunities in seed by getting into the high-end market, for example, organic and low chemical or green clean imaged produce, and then after in the oil, and then any byproducts, there is an opportunity. In the cake, we see the extracting protein. In the sludge from the oil cleaning, we see the opportunities for harvesting antioxidant. In biomass, we have seen the opportunities of producing the briquettes. And in all the plants or byproducts of sesame, we consider there is an opportunity of harvesting antioxidants, which is now getting a very very timely commodities for in the food market to improve the shelf life of other oil and the food. And there is where very rapidly growing international market on antioxidants for food preservatives as the natural food preservatives. So there could be opportunities of trapping the antioxidant or harvesting antioxidants from products and byproducts of the black sesame seed. Okay, so from here on, I would like to quickly pass on to Tieneke. What next from here, and what is there at the moment in the field?
Okay, excellent. So having completed the summer crops or black sesame, we did actually originally plant fennel in as a summer variety as well, and we've deemed it not probably it hasn't done as well as we were hoping over that summer period. So at a couple of the sites we're trialling fennel as a winter variety as well. But what I've got here are a couple of photos of cumin and kalonji. So we have got our winter spices in and planted, and we are running the small plot trials to trial some of those varieties over this winter season. So hopefully we'll have this sort of information for these varieties, as well as some catch-up information on fennel and caraway as well in the coming months. So basically, the next thing from here with this project is, now that we're 12 months in, we're looking at the second year, so this coming summer, to do some verification trials. So we're sort of calling for an expression of interest of anyone who's a producer who would be interested in growing black sesame over this coming summer. We're looking for people who'd be willing to volunteer to plant out 1 to 2 hectares, perhaps for one or both of the black sesame varieties that we've identified here as the potential leaders, but obviously there is the opportunity to trial any of those 4 varieties that we have trialled as well. We're looking at a predicted planting date for sometime starting November, depending on whereabouts in Australia you might be. So for Northern Australia, anywhere from early November through to early January is probably the ideal planting date. And this next season would be a grower managed trial. We're here for helping over the phone, but we would be hoping that you guys as producers might be able to manage this in small blocks on your own properties. These trials would have a seeding rate of about 2.5 kilos per hectare, and that's to achieve an optimal population density of approximately 300,000 to 500,000 plants per hectare. For you to get involved, we'd be hoping that you had a seed planter and a harvester, so that can be managed on that slightly larger scale. If you are still interested and don't have that, please don't hesitate to still get in touch, because we may have some workarounds that we can arrange with you. We'd be hoping potentially that if you don't have a seed planter or harvester, that there might be opportunities for adaptations to your own cropping systems, your own planting and harvesting equipment, and we're happy to talk that through and work that through with you. At the end of the verification trial, so that would be anywhere from maybe early February through to April next year, those harvested seed would be procured back by our industry partner, Agriventus Technologies. And so it is a closed loop system where the seed that we provide you would then come back, and we would be collecting data from that to feed into this project and look at the viability of this on a slightly larger scale. This whole project couldn't have been done alone by Surya and myself. We certainly are very, very grateful for all of the fantastic help that have come through. We are very appreciative of the financial support of the CRCNA, of CQ Uni and of Agriventus Technologies, and also from the expertise that we are able to call on from Lewis Hunter and others at Agriventus Technologies. We're very grateful for that. We have fantastic partners, Trap Services, BIFMAC in Queensland, Carissa and Arwen, who help to manage their local sites. Our local producers, Ian Kennedy and Peter Foxwell, who allow us to work on their properties here in Rockhampton and down in Biloela, and to the fantastic people at the DPI in the Northern Territory, to Chelsea Moore, who is running this series. We just couldn't have done this without her fantastic expertise in Darwin, and to Bashan Jayasakara. We're absolutely grateful for everybody's input into this project to get it to where it is. We're finding some great results, and we're really encouraged to be working, particularly through some challenging times with COVID and more of our partners having to step up and take on a little bit more over this time. They have done it seamlessly, and we're very grateful for that. I just thought I'd leave this up for a little bit longer, and if there are any questions, we can do that too. But I thought I'd leave this up so that you can find our contact details quite quickly. Please don't hesitate to contact Surya Bhattarai or myself, and there's Lewis Hunter's details there as well if you would like to ask any questions of him from that seed perspective as well. Thank you very much for your time.